Hi, my name's Laura Bruno, and today I have the great pleasure of introducing you to my friend and colleague, Michele Geyer. Chele is a highly trained psychic, a Pilates instructor, the creator of the Sacred Body Oracle, and so much more. Here today, she's going to talk about her life-changing car accident, something that we both share, and also how to move from panic and fear and anxiety into your life path and really why you came into this world. So welcome, Chele. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Laura. What an incredible pleasure. I know we've had lots of conversations on the phone over the years, but seeing face to face is a whole different experience. So I really appreciate this.
Wonderful. So you know this, but the viewers don't know this. There's so many ways that we could have taken this conversation that I actually asked for dream guidance on what should we talk about. And I had a dream where there was more to the dream, but the part that involved Chele was that we were standing in a room and there were all these little cubby holes. There were actually 360 cubby holes, one for each degree of the zodiac. And I kept pulling out an envelope that said 29 Aries. And so when I got up, I wrote that dream up, sent it as an email to Chele, and it turned out that it was a shared dream because you also had a dream about cubby holes that same night, right?
I sure did.
Yeah. And so then I asked Chele for dates for a lot of the things that were on her bio just to see what 29 Aries pinged. And sure enough, it was the very first thing on her bio, which was this life-changing car accident. That's actually where your progressed sun was at the time of the car accident. And it's where the collective North Node is right now. So let's start there. The Sabian symbol for that is the music of the spheres, and that just seems perfect. So what happened? When was it? What happened?
So May of 1983, I was driving from my work, which was at my family boatyard, with my boyfriend, John. And we were going off to lunch, tootling along, having this conversation on this path that we had traveled every day to the sandwich shop. And somebody turned left in front of me, and my head was turned, and John slammed his hands into the dashboard and said, "Stop!" I slammed on my brakes, but it was too late. And one thing led to the other, and I ended up with lots of neck stuff. He ended up in the hospital with mostly just jarred bones and things. But the car got totaled, and panic attacks started really soon after.
Yeah. So can you describe some of that?
The panic?
Mm-hmm.
The first time, I can't remember the exact first time it happened, but I think I was on the Bay Bridge going from Oakland, California to San Francisco, where I lived. And I remember feeling compression in my chest and then this inability to take an inhalation, which I later found out was because I wasn't exhaling enough. There was no more room for inhalation. Symbolic, of course. And after that moment, I thought there was something seriously wrong with me because I didn't know anything about panic. I didn't know anything about anxiety. I was very young. And, that was the 80s, 83. Not very many people knew about what this was all about. So then my second one was up in Lake Tahoe. I was with my dad and my boyfriend, John. And I said, "I can't breathe." And they just stopped dead in their tracks. I said, "I can't breathe." And my body started to feel numb. This was the second panic attack. My body started to feel numb. I started to separate from my body. And all I could do was try and control not going anyplace because I thought I was disappearing. That was probably the biggest common thread through all the panic attacks were I slowly felt like I was pulling away from my fingertips, then my hands, then my arms, my feet and my legs. And I was coming into this place that kind of lifted up out of my body. I could actually feel my spirit energies peeling off my body from the inside. And I only know this in retrospect. I had no clue what was going on. I thought I was dying. And that I hear is a really common thing with people who have panic attacks. They feel like they're dying.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard that from a lot of people. I know a number of clients that suffer from that. And I've empathed some people's panic attacks where I'm like, this isn't mine, but whoa, like what is happening? And then just a lot of people end up in the ER thinking they're having a heart attack and it's panic. So how, like, I mean, that was obviously very intense and it went on for a while, but you found your spiritual path in trying to treat this, right?
I did. So at first, it happened a lot. I had panic attacks probably every day, serious ones every day for about 6 months. And the way I handled it was naturally getting up and going, I got to go for a walk. And I'd go for a walk and I would just walk until I came back to myself. And sometimes I would be hovering up above my head, but I was way more connected to my body after walking and over my head than I was before that. So that's how I handled that first. And then I got married to somebody else a few years later. I was still having them like, once every few months I'd have a panic attack. And I went to a doctor who told me that I had stress problems. And he gave me a prescription for something called Librium. And I got it filled, but I put it on in the back of my linen closet. And I found it when I moved out of my apartment when I got married. This was 1985. So 2 years later, I got married to somebody else, found this stuff, and I threw it away. I never took it, but I still had the panic attacks. I'd have them on airplanes. I'd have them on bridges and elevators. I avoided elevators at all costs. And one day when I was finishing my degree at San Francisco State, we had this group of us had put together an ad campaign for our media class. And we had this group of models with us. They were modeling Body Glove. I don't know if you guys remember Body Glove, but they were these like wetsuit material outfits. So anyway, this model saw a young woman. Her name was Joey. She saw me going into a deep anxiety state. And she said, you know what, Chele? She very kindly sat down next to me and said, you know what? I think you'd really like a meditation class at this place called Berkeley Psychic Institute. So I went home, I called them up, and I couldn't get in right away. They had you go through a reading before you go to the classes. Mm-hmm. So I called them up, couldn't get in for a reading, and hung up the phone really fast. And then I started prolifically reading Shirley MacLaine's books, Ruth Montgomery's books about automatic writing, all that great stuff back in the 80s. And I finally said, I'm going to call. This was a year later. I'm going to call and see if I can get into Berkeley Psychic Institute again. They got me in the next day. I had a reading. And then within 2 weeks, I was in a meditation class. And that meditation class, the first thing we learned was how to ground. The second thing we learned was how to create our own bubble around us. And that's what, we call it an aura. And I learned that I could be inside my own bubble, grounded to the earth, and my panic attacks went away forever.
Wow. So you've never had one since?
Nope.
Wow.
I've fought up against them, in high anxiety times, but I know that breathing, centering, grounding, and being inside my own space will essentially rescue me. They were great tools, and I will never, ever, ever forget. And so happy that I found that.
Oh, yeah.
And I stayed with the Berkeley Psychic Institute for a few years. I went through their clairvoyant training and learned how to, in a way, control, manage, accept, and embrace the levels of intuition I was having, because that's part of what panic for me was about. Too much outside energy coming in, not knowing what to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was similar, actually. I mean, there's so many similarities, even in the transits. I looked up the transits. I didn't have the time of your accident, but you gave me the date and location. And so I was able to get quite a bit of information. And it was kind of trippy just how similar some of the transits were. They weren't exactly the same, but it was like they rhymed. And so in both of our accidents, our Folus, which is the small thing, big effect centaur, was exactly pinged. So in my car accident, it was like a triple whammy ping there. My Pholus is at 7 degrees Pisces, which is right where the blue moon is going to be. So it's the 8-degree Pisces Sabian symbol, but 7 degrees, 7 to 8 degrees. So I'm curious what's going to happen on that blue moon for me. But at the time of my car accident, the south node was right there, like exactly conjunct it. The moon was just about to conjunct it in the descendant of the moment, because I knew exactly when the accident happened. The descendant was like right there. So it was a triple whammy on my little small thing, big effect centaur, which is sextile my north node, so my destiny. And then Mars and the sun were conjuncting my midheaven, and Venus was conjuncting my Chiron. So it was like, in retrospect, it made a ton of sense. In your case, Black Moon Lilith had just crossed your Pholus. So the same thing, small thing, big effect. And your Pholus also is sextile your North Node. So that destiny point. And there was a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that day on your North Node. So very close. They were exact, but your North Node had just been passed by them. And I had Uranus conjuncting my Jupiter at my car accident. So this like Uranus energy can be very neurological, right? Like, and psychic, like, like all that information coming in. And then Pholus, that trigger point. And then Lilith is also a very kind of chaotic energy. If you're not like in your body, and you're getting overstimulated, then that Lilith can present as panic attacks, as super hypersensitivity, autoimmune reactions. Yeah, it was like all right there in the stars.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
I love astrology, and it's one of my favorite maps, but you go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, so for you, like, if you encounter someone who's having this kind of issue, like with the overstimulation, the panic, I mean, a lot of times we say, hey, get grounded. How do you get in your body? But like, are there some very simple tips that somebody could do just in the moment?
Yeah, I would say basically relaxing the body is probably one of the first things to do. But if somebody is ADD, ADHD, or really wound and anxious, telling them to relax their body it's ridiculous. Go for a walk. It's the easiest thing to do. Go for a walk. That's what helped me. Also, visualizing a connection, barefoot in the grass, visualizing a connection between your tailbone and the earth. I think those are the two simplest things. One of the other tools I learned later on down the road, and this is yogic related. So yoga plays a huge role, I know has in your life, and it has in mine as well. And it may not be the path either one of us has chosen, but it's always been there right on the periphery, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
So putting our hands on our belly, and as you exhale, gently pressing your belly towards your spine. And as you inhale, gently expanding your belly. It assists in the breath, but it also assists us in coming into our belly, into our grounding, into our center. Those are probably the three easiest, simplest tools.
Okay. And is that a core focus? Is that why you ended up getting more into Pilates? Because I know Pilates, there's a lot of crossover with yoga, but it seems, I'm not an expert in Pilates, but it seems like Pilates has much more emphasis on the core. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, Pilates has a ton of emphasis on what we call the core. It's the abdominal core. And Pilates is a direct relative of yoga. In fact, supposedly the story is that Joe Pilates could not do yoga in his body. So he created his own yoga based on yoga principles and positions, and he named them differently. So yes, absolutely. And I would say that being physical for me has always been extremely helpful, because part of my anxiety and panic is about just being connected to the body. It's about that almost desire to move through everything really fast and kind of spin around and be away from the body, because the body makes us be here now. Mm-hmm. It says you have to be here now if you're in the body.
Yeah.
So helping panic what we might think would help panic would be to dissociate from the body, but really it's about getting close to the body, in the body. And that's why the three things I would say are visualizing grounding to the center of the earth from your body, feeling your belly moving in and out as you breathe, so breathing with belly movements, and walking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and when we were kind of going back and forth about this video call, one of the things that you had mentioned was maps and path working. And I know that's been a huge thing for you. And so the Sacred Body Oracle that you created, I remember the very early phases of that. I think I have like one of the very first decks.
Yes.
I know you've kind of added to it and done some more work with it over the years. But where does that play into your journey and kind of what you're offering?
The connection between the energy, general term energy, and the physical. I've always been interested in how they link. So, for example, heart chakra, heart, just to be very simplistic. Crown chakra, top of head, what glands they connect to. And at BPI, we learned a lot about the chakras, a lot about the aura, a lot about the energy. So our subtle anatomy is what we learned a lot about. And in Pilates and fitness, I learned a lot about the gross anatomy, the body anatomy. So as I got into Pilates helped me to link my ability to see energy and also be in the body. So as I'm watching people do their Pilates exercises, I'm actually seeing their chakras or their subtle anatomy and how it aligns with or connects to their physiology. So the Sacred Body cards or the Sacred Body Oracle is really about those link ups, the energetic connections, which is also the name of my business, the energetic connections between subtle anatomy and gross anatomy, body anatomy and energy anatomy.
And the artwork in those, there's a real Celtic feel to it, right? Yeah. And I assume that's intentional. I know you and I both have a very strong Celtic heritage and just connection to the fairy realm and all of that. Is that a culture that you found just like works particularly well with pathways?
I don't know if I started off thinking that, because the truth is I really wanted an artist to do the cards, and I'm not an artist. So I did all these cut and paste versions of the cards, and then I'd laminate them, and there were like 6 versions of cut and paste from internet pictures, how do I want to put these cards together? And then somebody one day said to me, you've got all those pictures of your travels from Ireland. Why don't you just apply those? And I went, oh, now that would be really easy, because I had lots of pictures. So that's how that happened. It was more for practicality in terms of publishing the cards, less about how they were linked. But over time, I realized in my studies of the goddess cultures, the wheel of the year, the Celtic wheel of the year, the seasons, the elements, the directions, and also more lately, Druidry. There's a huge link up. The sacred spiral, for example, not the sacred single spiral, but the triple spiral. Mm-hmm. The Druids simply put, and I've got one on my neck right now, land, sea, and sky. And so first you get grounded in your body. Then you go to the sea, which is sort of the element of water and emotion and felt senses and things like that. And then you go into the spirit realm, which is sky. But they're all interconnecting spirals. So you're not only in one evolving to the next, you're in all 3 simultaneously. So in that way, yeah, there's a huge connection. And it just sort of happened to be. It was one of those where I was led. I did not know where I was going, and it ended up there.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's so often life, right? When we get that little nudge, that little intuition, oh, this creative project is kind of percolating back there, and what you think it's going to be, it turns into something totally different. But after you've created it, you're like, well, of course, how could it have been otherwise, right?
Yeah, exactly. And back to the question really about maps, Laura, Maps are everything. I can find a map metaphor in almost everything. Everything from the chakras and the meridians to our emotions, leading to thoughts, leading back to emotions and chemistry. Everything's a map. But path working itself, much like astrology, is one of my favorite maps. And whether we use it as something to, and I know it's not supposed to be predictive, but in a way it can be forecasting in a sense, because there is a timeline to it, as you well know. We can use it and learn about what's to come and prepare ourselves and actually set intentions around that map, whether it's transits or progressions. Or we can look at it in retrospect and go, like I did, oh, here I am studying the triple spiral in Druidry and how perfectly that map was for me, even though I didn't know I was mapping myself at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, back to astrology, if I didn't know right now that I have a Pluto transit squaring my moon, Pluto squaring moon, I would think I was going back into anxiety and panic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, my body is responding like it did back in those days.
Yeah. And you and I mean, our charts are very linked, but I've got Pluto conjuncting my moon. That's been happening for a while at the same time as my Chiron return. So fun times, and 6 Saturn transits. So it's kind of the same thing. Like if you know that there's all this stuff going on, and especially for me, I knew this was going on. I was like, I got to prepare for this. I've been preparing for this time period for like 5 years. So yeah, it does help, because sometimes you just get a cluster of transits and progressions, and it's just like a perfect storm. And you're not going to avoid strong emotions. You're not going to avoid some chaos. But if you know, okay, there's a bigger picture here, and these are the ways that I could actually benefit if I lean into these changes. I have to make changes, that I'm not getting out of making changes. But if you know, okay, that's a given, what kind of changes am I feeling led to make, then it goes a lot easier for you. That's my experience anyway.
Absolutely. We know by seeing what's happening that resistance is futile.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty amazing. So what do you find helps you in the context of such huge transformation?
Yoga. I mean, I've done yoga. So like you, after I had my car accident, I wasn't really having panic attacks per se. What I was having was just complete overwhelm. It was like, I mean, I was always very psychic, even as a child. My parents were like, oh, you're too sensitive. And, I knew when people were going to die. And I mean, like all the spooky stuff that like is very uncomfortable when you're a kid. But that was kind of like my other life. And I was able to keep it mostly separate. And then what happened to me after the car accident, which was a brain injury for me, was that I just completely lost my filter. Like there was no filter whatsoever. And so when I would like enter into a room or into a situation, I wasn't just picking up on, oh, this person's a little weird, or they have like a little bit of energy. Like I was feeling it full on empath, and it's like everybody. So that's been a gradual process. Yoga was really helpful. Meditation, really helpful. I mean, I didn't spend 7 years in Tibet, but I spent quite a few years, like literally on the futon, with an ice bag on my head in like my equivalent of a sensory deprivation tank.
7 years in the cave.
Yeah, it was basically like being in the cave. So that helped, and just dream work. I mean, I've always been a really prolific dreamer, and I still get tons of really actionable information from my dreams. But after the car accident, the dreams like really ramped up, because I couldn't handle any surprises. Like if anything was out of the ordinary, my startle response, I actually dated a veteran for a while after my car accident. Like my progressed moon was crossing my north node, and we met, and like he ended up being very key to my recovery. But one of the things that he said was like, I'm a vet, and like you have the worst PTSD of anyone I've ever seen. Like you're like totally shell shocked all the time. And so I it was a gradual process, but yoga was a big part of it, kind of getting me more in my body and at least to have moments of calm. So like you're in Shavasana, and, you know, for a lot of people, that's a hard pose because you're not doing anything, right? But to bring yourself back to that and feel yourself on the ground and remember that like, it's corpse pose, right? So it's like, you know, at some point you will die. Like you are not just this body is mortal and you are immortal. And, you know, somewhere in here, like you're a bigger being than all of this crazy frenetic energy. And that was a very slow process.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, yoga, I think, in so much of its mapping system, whether it's the 8 limbs or like yoga nidra. Yoga nidra is all about getting fully into Shavasana. You're in Shavasana while you're doing yoga nidra, but yoga nidra takes us into a state first of accepting our bodies. And then it takes us into a state of accepting our energy body, which is the prana, the breath, the life force. Then it takes us into a state of accepting our emotions. And slowly but surely within, we accept our mental state. And then we get into what they're calling like the bliss state. But it's in a sense about peeling off the sheaths of our existence to get into that relaxed, totally receptive, in a way, God state.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, yoga, I think, is one of the best forms or modalities, but I'm calling it a map.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm just keen on that word lately. So, and as I said earlier, like for people who have racing mind, telling somebody to turn their mind off is silly. What we need to do is, in a way, redirect the mind, and that will calm the body at some point. People who are lit up on a nervous system or a chemical level, you know, like adrenals adrenal hormones are surging through the body.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just say, sit down, lay in Shavasana.
No.
As you said, you know, the person can't do it. So they really do need to actually do something to wake up the body and connect with the body first, and then they can relax. Mm-hmm. Again, this is why I feel like yoga nidra really answers the question, because you start off addressing the body.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I also liked what you said earlier about walking, because so with my brain injury, the reason that I had so many problems was I hit my occipital lobe, which is what controls your vision. And so my eyes were totally fine. I went to a whole bunch of eye doctors. Everybody's like, you look great. But like, meanwhile, I had slightly double vision. So it wasn't enough to get diagnosed with double vision, but it was enough that my brain was having to work overtime because the information coming from one eye was completely different than the information coming from another eye. And so like normal activities, it was like walking on a high wire with a strobe light. Somebody's like shaking that high wire. And, you know, it takes a lot of energy, and you get overwhelmed much faster. And so I went to several different visual doctors, you know, behavioral optometrist, visual therapist, ocular balance therapy, you know, all sorts of different things. But one of the doctors was a huge fan of walking, and it was because it's a left right, like it's bilateral, and you're swinging your arms, and your left brain, your right brain are starting to like connect. And what he was saying was anything that does that, so like cross crawl motions or Kundalini yoga, I found very helpful, because there's you know, it's a lot more active than like Hatha yoga or Ashtanga yoga. You're like doing a lot of repeat movements, but there's an emphasis on the bilateral. And he was even saying things like knitting can be very helpful, just, you know, left, right, left, right, left, right. So anything that gets that brain to be more holistic can calm things down.
Yep. I love cross crawl exercises. Brain education, just in general terms, is probably one of the most important things we can do for our world today, because, and I don't know what the statistics are, but kids have ADD and ADHD, like they're being diagnosed like crazy in the school systems, and they have been for many, many years. So one doesn't have to have a brain injury to have their hemispheres separated.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and there's so many people that have these disconnected right-left brain. And so this re-education process is really important, I think, for our schools, so that the children, as their cognitive mind develops more and more, that their right and left brains are coordinating and interacting with each other.
Mm-hmm.
The cognitive mind can actually come up with, and I say cognitive mind, meaning the ability to choose, the ability to make educated decisions that are based on both aspects of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, and interesting that you mentioned the kids, because one of the behavioral optometrists that I went to in Evanston, Illinois, his practice was primarily children. And so there were a few of us adults, some of us had had brain injuries, a lot of women that are going through menopause. There's so many estrogen receptors in the eye that a lot of people don't realize this. There's visual changes that occur, and it's not just nearsighted or farsighted. It's also like the not having enough moisture in your eyes can change how you're seeing things. And so there were a fair number of menopausal and perimenopausal women in there, and me with a brain injury, another guy with a brain injury, and then the rest was all these kids. And the kids were so fascinating because most of them had been diagnosed as either very slow learners or as having ADHD. I remember there was this one little boy, they called him Willie the Wiggler, because he couldn't sit still. He just had to constantly move, and they wanted to put him on drugs. They wanted to do all this stuff. And Dr. Getzell, the person that I treated with, was going around to classrooms and like giving lectures to parents and kids, and had a very advanced testing to figure out what was going on. And I watched this little boy go from like total spaz to the calmest, sweetest, kindest, just gentlest little boy. He was so smart in like 8 months or something. And it was just that his vision was so off. And so he was wiggling like to try to rapidly correct, where like one eye was seeing this and the other eye was seeing that. And then I remember there was another little girl who was like 4 reading levels behind her grade and super shy, really, really insecure. And she was in there for probably about 9 months. Kids' brains, they're much more malleable than adult brains. And especially if you have brain damage, like you don't have all your synapses, So it takes, I was in there for a couple of years, and I watched all these kids, master things that it was taking me many, many months to do. They were doing in weeks. But anyway, this little girl was so amazing. She ended up being a really great actress. And not only did she suddenly be able to read, but she was able to like memorize lines. And it turned out she was super smart. It was just that like the vision wasn't working. And so I do find that that's a really underappreciated factor in a lot of health problems that seem like they're unrelated, including anxiety or ADD, learning disabilities, but even just like fatigue, because if your vision is off, your brain is having to work so much harder to make sense of the world that like, of course, you're going to be more tired because you're working harder.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of eye issues, one of my friends here in Washington State had some problems with one of his eyes. He's much older, he's not a child, but to solve the problem, and this is what they've done for years, they put a patch over the eye because it was starting to almost make him crazy. And that's the kind of like the words he would use, I feel insane.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't even imagine what it would be like for a child whose life is all about impressions. There is no ability to reason it out. It's all these emotional and chemical experiences coming in.
Well, and also if you don't have a comparison, like when I went in for my visual therapy, he said, "Oh, you're very smart. You had visual problems as a child." And I was like, "No, I was totally functional. I was on track to get a PhD in English literature. Like I read 3 novels a week. I could read, and now I can't." And he was like, "Okay, well, yeah, but you were doing it in a really circuitous way." And there were different things that he could tell just based on like how I held a pencil and different things that I did. But I had to restart from scratch. But my point is that I knew, like, I had some semblance of normal. Whereas some of these kids, you know, they get started on the screens at such a young age, and the eyes are not ready for that. And so like they're not taking in the big, they're tunneling. And that is another thing, like tunnel vision, which is one of the reasons why walking is so helpful, because anytime that you've got anxiety or visual issues, which there's a lot of crossover, the temptation is to tunnel, right? Like you want to cocoon yourself and like take in as little information as possible, because if you're taking in less information, there's less contrast. And so it seems easier, but then the problem is that radically increases your anxiety levels, because you're only seeing here. So your likelihood of being startled is very high, like something comes over here. And so for me, I think that was, I was definitely tunneling. I was wearing like the baseball cap and the sunglasses, and like, I had to like totally relearn how to have peripheral vision and how to be aware of what's behind me. But for me, and I know for a lot of other people, that directly impacted my psychic skills. So what was kind of this like little weird quirk that I now had to completely rely on, because I was essentially blind going through life. It was much easier to just close my eyes when I was walking and like open them for a second and then close them. Yeah. But you need to compensate. And so then, the psychic awareness got stronger. Did you find something similar, like in your trajectory with the panic?
Yes. In fact, I can say even today, because as I mentioned to you, that I have to really focus on grounding and centering if I know I'm being recorded like this. So, today I said to myself right before I turned my computer on, gosh, I wish I could have this conversation with Laura with my eyes closed. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the way that we were taught at my BPI programs was to close our eyes and do readings instead of reading with eyes open. And now I do both. And I'm sure you do too. It's not like you do your telephone sessions with your eyes closed, right?
I do them with my eyes closed quite a bit.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I see more with my eyes closed than with my eyes open. It's a lot easier for me to focus.
Yes, it sure is. And luckily, what I was leading to was, as we become more less traumatized by those stimuli out there, as we become more adept at managing that kind of stuff, we can actually see, walking through our daily life, we can see energy, which is how it happened for me in terms of Pilates. When I came out of the fitness world and into the Pilates world, I started to blend the two things, meaning the physical and the energetic. And I could see with my eyes open, like watching somebody do a Pilates exercise on the reformer, which is one of the more common machines. I would go, oh, I can see that her third chakra is blocked. And I can also see that her left shoulder has some binding in it, even without some energetic binding, by the way, even probably some kind of an emotional accident at some point in her life, and it bound up her shoulder. So anyway, yeah, eyes open, eyes closed.
Yeah. Well, and for me, I like doing things with my eyes closed, just because I don't know, I find it helps me focus. But when I'm, walking or looking at photographs or something, definitely I'm seeing energies around people. And I have a weird thing where, like, I have to check with David a lot, my husband, like, am I seeing this accurately, like with my eyes, or is this a spiritual thing? Because I think people look very different than they do. Like sometimes I'll see like Hollywood stars or whatever that everyone thinks are so beautiful. And like, to me, it's like, whoa, what is that? Like, it's like creepy, scary. And then other times I remember we went to visit my dad. This was like, he had been battling non-Hodgkin's lymphoma for years and was like on major chemo and had lost tons of weight and everything. But the process of that took him from being this like total PhD physics computer programmer, analyst, into his heart much more. And So I'd talked to him on the phone a lot, but I hadn't seen him in person for a couple years. And we went and I walked into the house and I mean, he was close to dying. But we walked into the house and he had been planning my grandmother's 100th birthday party. So his mom's 100th birthday party, which got him really into his heart. He was talking to all of her friends and just, it was like incredibly healing for him because all of her friends were like, oh, she talks about you all the time and we've been praying for you. And like, he had kind of felt like just the son that was always doing everything, but wasn't really that appreciated. So anyway, I saw him and his heart was so radiant and like his aura was so bright that I crossed the threshold and I was like, Dad, you look fantastic. And everybody kind of looked at me like, what are you doing? And I was like, Dad, seriously, this is the best you've ever looked. And I always remember that. And I have to like check in sometimes because my read, well, put it this way, I go through life and like how most people see the world is very different than what my experience is. And sometimes that's great, you know, if you're being paid to do a psychic reading, but if you're just trying to live your life, sometimes you have to check in with people that aren't using the psychic eyes to see, is this showing up in reality or like, am I seeing behind the scenes?
Yeah, I hear that, Laura. And do you find, let me ask you this, how do you handle what I perceive as misunderstanding for how we might see the world that's so different than somebody else?
It depends on the person. So
Yeah.
it's easier when, I mean, and it's not always, right? Like people pay me to do psychic readings for them or astrology or whatever. And I can't help what I see. Like I scan you, I'm not going to lie to you. And so I see what I see. And sometimes people don't like that. You know, I'm telling them something that they don't want to hear. And I mean, they try to make me change it. They're like, oh, well, don't you think it's this? And I'm like, no, I don't. Like, it's this. Oh, well, don't you mean that? And like, they keep prompting me to like correct myself. And I'm like, look, you're entitled to your opinion, but you called me. I'm not going to lie to you. You know, this is what I see. And those people, they don't like it in the moment, but I very often will hear from them afterwards. Like, I didn't want to trust what you said, but you were exactly right. So I've learned I've been doing this now for 22 years or something professionally. So, I mean, I've learned that I just have to wait. And when I see something and it's really, really strong and people around me are like, no, it's not happening that way. No, you're not seeing that. Like I know in myself to hold on to that. I'm not attached to whether somebody else sees it that way because I realize I see things very differently and oftentimes many years out. So like they might be correct like right now, but for, what's the real dynamic? Where's this heading? It takes time to unfold. And so as I've gotten more patient, it's become easier to deal with that disconnect. And then, some people I just know life will go easier, like relatives or some friends. I mean, I try not to have too much interaction with people that just utterly doubt what I'm saying. Or if I do, I just make it all about them. I just ask them questions and I pretty much say nothing. So those are my strategies.
Yeah. Good. I find that, my sensitivities and probably related to early imprints, because by the way, my sense of anxiety and panic is that not everybody has it and not everybody has anxiety to the extreme of panic, but it really depends on the early imprints where we came from without going into great detail. That's a whole nother 5-hour conversation. But, and I digressed a little bit. What I was really going to say is that based on my own personal imprints, I'm hypersensitive to when people don't believe what I'm saying. Like in a social situation, I'll just say something and they'll all kind of go, huh? And I'll feel that judgment. So I'll feel like I need to go back to what you were talking about with the baseball cap, the blowers and the sunglasses. Get me out of here. I haven't learned how to handle that. So that creates its own level of anxiety. And I think that when we have a current condition, whatever that might be. Even though we've resolved it, let's just say 90% or 75%, but we're still carrying some of the endings of it, or the dust of it, if you will. It's still in our systems, that we can actually probably be of more assistance to others, having not only had the experience, but the ability to actually manage through the present timeness of it. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. And I find, I mean, as you know, everything cycles around, especially with astrology. I think if you retroactively look at certain periods of your life where, oh, I'm feeling more panic than usual, you would probably find that some of those same points that were triggered at the time of your accident or in the short time afterwards are being re-triggered by Pluto or Chiron or like a blue moon, or, you know, and any of these more unusual events. I find when it's an exact hit, you can have done, you know, all the healing in the world. I mean, I'm finding that out with my Chiron return. I mean, I've done a ton of healing. And I mean, I had a traumatic childhood. I've been open about that. I think that's why I'm as intuitive as I am, was just like, how do I manage the chaos? You know, where's the pathway through this mess, right? But even for all the healing work that I've done, when my exact Chiron return hit, the moon also crossed that point, like to the minute. It was like a precise hit of the first impact of the exact Chiron return and the moon at the same time. And I was just like, what is happening? Like, it was so bizarre. And then I thought, well, I got to check my transits. And so I checked my transits. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, that was like a double whammy exactitude right there. And then you can dial it back. But as you said, it really helps to know, oh, I've got some of this stuff going on, because otherwise the temptation is to think, oh no, it's all coming back. You know, it's like, oh no, I have a head injury again, or oh no, I'm not, you know, I'm not okay about this. So
Right.
it does help to pull back and get a little more perspective.
Right. And as we move along our personal timelines, whether it's the world's timeline or our personal body's timelines, at least I do, and I'm sure most people do too, is that we realize that we don't have to be perfect in our fixes. Like, just because we fixed something, quote, fixed something when we were 30 after our first Saturn return was over, doesn't mean that there's not going to be a revisiting of the energies. And it doesn't mean we're bad or wrong or still there. It's all part of evolution.
I think that's so important. And also just to realize that, you know, we are human. We may have like lots of multidimensional aspects to ourselves, but it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to, you know, have issues and say, hey, I need to take a little time to like go internal for a while and have fewer activities. And for me, that really helps, because while I know to kind of wait it out, like, I mean, I'm a huge skeptic. Nobody believes that. Everybody thinks I'm like way out there, but I'm like a super skeptic. And so when I get some kind of weird download, I check it. I ask for dreams. I check my transits. I meditate on it. And I'm kind of like a brat with what I call my dream guys. I'm like, hey, don't mess with me. Like, you can't mess with me this way. Like, and so I test and retest and retest. And so by the time that I actually share information with like a loved one, I've already gone through all of those testers. Like, I don't share it if I'm not certain, if it's something really out there or weird. And so I know, but it still is kind of, it gets to you when people that you care about and that are more open to this kind of stuff they still don't believe you. It is kind of difficult to manage that. And for me, pulling back and being more in myself and surrounding myself with things that feel nurturing. And it doesn't mean I need to not have those people in my life, but I just don't bring up that topic with them after a while, because I know it's going to rock me, and I know it's going to put tension on the relationship. And I know from my experience that my psychic stuff tends to be correct. And so I don't need to like preach at somebody, but it's kind of like, well, this is my life. And you know, this is my experience. And so that, I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, it does. And I think I wanted that information for me. But also I think that people in general need to get that we actually have choices of our surroundings, whether that's the people, the place, the thing, the event, whatever. You get to choose. You don't have to go there or hang out with that person just because they are long-term friends or whatever. Maybe we've evolved. And if we go back to being who we used to be, just to be with that person, we're not honoring ourselves. Whether it's about your intuitive hits of somebody or just who you've become as a personality in the body.
And that seems to be happening more and more. I mean, that's a theme that I'm hearing a lot in sessions from people where long-term friendships or lots of breakups of long-term relationships, where it's not like they hate each other. It's not like they dislike each other. Even it's just like they're, you know, on different paths, and like trying to connect is not working. Like, you know, the canceled plans, and it's not them canceling the plans. It's like the universe is canceling the plans. And sometimes that's temporary, right? Like sometimes you're just going through something and you need to go through it by yourself, or you need to go through it with new friends that you're just encountering. And so I think it's helpful to realize that just because you're in this phase right now doesn't mean that you're always going to be in that phase. You don't have to burn all your bridges just because not everybody agrees with where you're at right now.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's helpful.
And the beauty of the astrological map, just to bring the map idea back in, is that it's timely. You know, it's not just looking at, and by the way, I love Tarot and I love the Kabbalah, and these are all maps.
Mm-hmm.
My sacred body cards, I create maps out of them. But the astrology is about what's happening in terms of where the sun is now, where the moon is now, and where you are in relation to those planets.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about present time.
Yeah. And place too. I mean,
Yeah.
place is very important. And then that gets you back to the grounding and this idea of be here now. And
Yes.
also the reminder that everything's temporary, because I mean, some things are very slow, like a Pluto transit is going to take, you know, years, but a moon transit happens every month. And so, I mean, I have some clients where every time the moon crosses their Chiron, like they have a meltdown, and it's just like, okay, this is like clockwork. We've seen this now like 4 or 5 times in a row. You're going to mark this on your calendar to like be extra nurturing around this time of the month. And it might not be your period. It's when the moon
Right.
crosses your Chiron.
Exactly.
So just, you know, when you know what makes you tick, and when you know like what are the patterns that are being triggered in your life, it just makes it a lot easier. It's a map, as you said, like you have your way through this terrain, however rocky and mountainous it is.
Yep. And that leads me to another something I think about a lot and like to study a little bit more, would like to study a little bit more, is the universal principles or natural law. Everything has a rhythm. Everything has kind of a counterpart.
Mm-hmm.
So like gender, masculine, feminine is one of them. But rhythm is what led me to think about this, because you were just talking, it's cycles. We have cycles. And just because we have highs and lows, like you said, doesn't mean that you're in the middle of your menstrual whatever. And it doesn't mean you're bipolar either. You know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of what should I say, diagnoses sometimes and medicines that are given that don't need to be diagnosed and or given, because it's not about that. It's just natural cycles.
Although I will say I have a bipolar mom, so I will say that I have seen the miracles of medication as well. Like sometimes there is just a chemical thing, and again, no shame in that. If it's a tool, it could be a temporary tool to get you through a difficult transit, or it could be something that is just running in the background but stabilizes you. And so I think there's many tools, and if you find one that works, that's the important thing.
Absolutely. Yes. I've had bipolar people in my life who medication has helped a great deal.
Yeah.
It's been a really important aspect.
And I know for me, CBD has actually been wonderful too. Just in like the first time that I started taking CBD, I went out to eat with my husband and his daughter, and we were sitting at the table, and I was just like, whoa. And they said, well, what? And I was like, I'm sitting here at the table and I'm just hearing you and you. And they were like, yeah, so. And I was like, this is the first time this has ever happened in a restaurant for me, where I can sit at the table and I'm like, if I choose, I'm just aware of you two. If I want to be aware of everything around me, I can be, but like something about the CBD, it just allowed me to like just have this little bubble at the table. It was a completely different restaurant experience. And that's been really helpful.
I bet that was, but that's one of the issues that I have. And my neighbors, if they're noisy, I have trouble coming in and not hearing them. So yeah, I have the same thing in restaurants too. So I get that.
Yeah.
It's nice to have an answer. And I'll also say that, again, back to when I first learned how to manage my energy, having a knowledge of where my personal space ended was huge. So we can use that. Okay, here is my auric field. It's about arm's length away, but it doesn't mean it always has to be there. It could be bigger if we want to have more of a broad-based communication, or we can bring it in really close if we want and sit in the restaurant and only be with our friends.
So I'm just checking the time, and we have been talking for almost an hour, so we should probably wrap things up. I'm sure we could do this again and talk about something completely different.
Yeah. Well, it's really nice talking to you about that, Laura, and not just my favorite thing, which is maps, but the probably more important is the amount of anxiety and stress that's happening in this world in so many people.
Oh, yeah.
To know how to handle that.
So thank you for sharing all of your story and your tips. And how do people find you?
sacredbodywisdom.com.
All right, perfect. And I'll put the links below as well. So thank you so much. Wonderful to see you.
Wonderful to see you too, Laura. Nice to hang out with you today.
All right, you take care. Bye.